Presidents Vladimir Zelenskyy and Donald Trump express hopes that talks with Ukrainian and European leaders at the White House could lead to trilateral talks with Russian President Vladimir Putin to bring an end to Russia's war on Ukraine.
I've just had the honor of being with President Zelenskyy and all of the discussions that we've had. We covered a lot of territory, and I spoke indirectly with President Putin today. We're going to call President Putin right after this meeting. I'm sure we're going to have a solid meeting, good meeting, maybe a great meeting, and we're going to try and work out a trilat after that and see if we can get it finished, put this to sleep. We're going to try and get a three-party meeting, maybe as soon as we can, and I have a feeling you and President Putin are going to work something out. Ultimately, this is a decision that can only be made by President Zelenskyy and by the people of Ukraine working also together in agreement with President Putin. And I just think that's very good things are going to come of it. So I hope we have a good meeting. And if we can have a good meeting, I'll set up a meeting with President Putin. And if you'd like, I'll go to that meeting. And not that I want to do that, but I will do that because we want to save a lot of people from dying. A lot of people are dying, and we got to save them.
What is very important that all the sensitive things, territorial, etc., we will discuss on the level of leaders during trilateral meeting, and President Trump will try to organize such meeting, and he said that he will come or not come. Ukraine will be happy if you will
both
participate.
Want me there, I will be there. Yeah,
yeah,
you know
thank you. And I think this is very important.
I sat down with our correspondent Adam Zivo to unpack the key takeaways from President Zelensky's visit to the White House.
Now, what are the key concessions Trump is pushing Zelenskyy to accept, and how do they align with Ukraine's stance on territorial integrity?
As of now, the exact concessions that Trump wants Zelenskyy to accept are a little bit unclear because so much is in flux in the diplomatic process. So at the Alaska summit on Friday, where Trump met with Putin, it appears that Trump accepted the idea that Ukraine needs to cede its Donetsk province in exchange for a ceasefire. Now, the problem here is that Donetsk is it's a very important, strategically important region where the core of Ukraine's defensive fortifications are located, including a belt of fortress cities such as Kramatorsk and Slovyansk, which have acted as a shield against Russian advancements. So if Ukraine were to give up that region, they would essentially leave central Ukraine vulnerable to future invasion, and the Ukrainians would have to rebuild all of their fortifications in neighboring provinces from scratch in territory that is less amenable to defense. So that's why during the weekend, Ukrainians were really nervous because that seemed to be what Trump was pushing for. However, following the meeting in the White House, it seems as if he might have backed away from that demand, but it is still a little bit unclear.
Now, with Trump potentially backing away from that demand, could that put a divide in Putin and Trump, not in their relationship, but in their negotiation talks? I mean, they're talking now about a potential trilateral conversation, but with Trump kind of going back and forth with what he's proposing could end this war, do you see both leaders, Putin and Zelenskyy, getting a bit frustrated with Trump, who's not really picking a side?
Well, the problem with Trump is that he seems to take sides, but he changes his sides so frequently. And that obviously would be frustrating for anyone. So I can understand why there might be some exasperation for both the Russians and the Ukrainians, although currently Trump seems to favor the Ukrainians. Now, obviously, there is divide between what Trump wants and what Putin wants. It seems as if Trump, at least at this point, is more skeptical about the idea of ceding Donetsk. But factor here is that Trump wants to give Ukraine real security guarantees, although what that means remains undefined. But Ukraine's European partners, for example, want to station some of their troops in Ukraine to act as a potential tripwire force, which means essentially a small token force where if Russia were to invade, they would have to, kill some of these Western soldiers, which would then automatically trigger greater involvement from these allies. And at the meeting yesterday, when asked whether or not Trump would support putting U.S. troops on the ground, he did not rule that out. So it seems like he's open to that idea. Trump is also interested in selling a very large volume of weapons to Ukraine. So last night, following the meeting in Washington, Zelenskyy had a press conference where he announced that there was a commitment for Ukraine to purchase about $90 billion in U.S. weapons using European funding. And that is obviously something that Putin is not happy about. Putin doesn't want Ukraine to have the capacity to defend itself. And he also is adamantly opposed to any international troops being stationed in Ukraine. So we can see multiple areas of tension here, which will complicate ongoing negotiations.
Well, and how feasible is the proposed bilateral meeting between Zelenskyy and Putin following trilateral talks, given that Putin's past reluctance to negotiate directly and now being a bit frustrated at Trump for supplying Ukraine with weapons?
Well, Putin has long opposed having any meeting with Zelenskyy because he has always framed Zelenskyy as an illegitimate leader. He has always tried to delegitimize the Ukrainian government. He has smeared it falsely as a Nazi-run state, which anyone who has spent any time in Ukraine can tell you very clearly is just like a hallucination. And then, because Ukraine does not permit elections during wartime, because you can't safely have people gather at polling stations when your cities are being bombed, Putin has recently taken this narrative that Zelenskyy is illegitimate because he's unelected, even though Zelenskyy's approval ratings in Ukraine are very high at between 60 to 70%. As such, for Putin to meet Zelenskyy would actually be a fairly big concession because it would hollow out some of Russia's main propaganda points about the Ukrainian government, which is why he's been reluctant to do so. However, if Putin feels that he needs to meet with Zelenskyy to keep Trump at least partially on side, I think he would be willing to make that compromise. And apparently, on a phone call yesterday, Putin did propose to Trump the possibility of meeting Zelenskyy in Moscow, although I don't think anyone would really go for that because I think Zelensky's life would be in terrible danger if he were to follow through with that kind of meeting.
Well, what are the biggest challenges to achieving a lasting peace deal, considering that Zelensky's emphasizing on security guarantees and Putin's territorial demands? Do we see there being a deal reached out in this war coming to an end anytime soon?
I mean, let's be honest, the biggest obstacle here is Russia, right? Russia wants Ukraine to cede 4 key provinces, so Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson, Zaporizhia, and although Russia currently occupies about 70% of this land, the remaining 30% that Ukraine still has control over is land where hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians currently live. And obviously no government in Kyiv is going to want to cede this land and dispossess hundreds of thousands of its citizens of their property or abandon them to potential occupation. And then, of course, this land is also where the front lines currently are, which means that this is where most of Ukraine's defensive fortifications are. Now, Putin seems to be making some small concessions here, where, for example, he's dropped his demand for the full annexation of Zaporizhia and Kherson, but it seems as if he's pretty adamant that he wants to vassalize Ukraine and turn into protectorate, for example, by taking control of Donetsk and having a clear line of invasion to Kyiv in the future should he desire to do so. So until Russia is able to accept that it is not going to be able to conquer Ukraine and that Ukraine will be independent, I don't think that we're going to go anywhere. Eventually, Putin is going to have to realize that he is not going to get what he wants.
Now, following Trump and Zelensky's first meeting, there was a lot of tension. And leaving this one now, a lot of people have said that this went way better. How big of a role do you think the presence of the European leaders played in the way Monday's meeting turned out?
I mean, it was huge. So first of all, we have to stress that there were some misunderstandings in the first meeting in February. So Zelenskyy just usually does not wear a suit to his formal meetings, and he wears fairly casual military-inspired attire to show solidarity with the soldiers who are fighting on the front line. And this is something that people in Ukraine are supportive of because it can be alienating when you have all of these hundreds of thousands of men who are fighting on the front lines under very austere conditions, and then you have your president gallivanting around in fancy suits. You know, it's not good optics. So Zelenskyy has taken a more austere approach, which is something that, for example, Churchill did back in World War II. but that is something that was not understood by the White House, and they took offense to that. So this time around, European leaders decided at the very last minute, very suddenly, to say, okay, we need to support Ukraine. We need to come and be there with Zelensky basically as his bodyguard to protect him from being bullied. And they coached him on how to better engage with Trump. But I think more important than all of this is the fact that Trump understood that he could not bully Zelensky because Zelensky had all of his allies with him. And these weren't just, one or two leaders. These were 7 European leaders, the leaders of France, Germany, Italy, the United Kingdom, Finland, which is a smaller country, but, the Finnish president has a good relationship with Trump, plus the heads of the EU and NATO.